Hello, I'm Ryan Gilbert. I'm currently studying MA Games Art at the University of Hertfordshire. The following is my video essay for the unit Creative Economies. This unit was designed to teach and inform us about the creative economies from workspaces, grant applications, and how the business world and art world connect. This video essay assignment was set up to show what we have learnt in the unit and to show our abilities to identify problems and new issues in the creative economies. Additionally, it became a good means for us to meet new people in our chosen fields. This was for the interview part of our assignment. This video will explore a growing field of creativity in the creative economy, the automation of the creative economy. In this video, I pose the question: is it possible for machines to replace artists in the creative field? And if so, how will we have to adapt to it? The creative economy is an ever-shifting and changing field. Technology is constantly evolving and improving around the sector. Currently, the creative sector is the fastest growing sector in the UK, according to the Nesta. But could this be in jeopardy by new technologies, or will it only further push the creative industries? I will be exploring both sides of the argument, from the good and the bad points. I will then be exploring possible options on how we can deal with this in the future, and coming to some conclusions from my findings. There are many views on this subject from many different perspectives. Currently, machines are seen a lot in the production and manufacturing side of businesses. For example, the BMW production line in their Leipzig facility in Germany, where cars are built by machines on a robotic assembly line, and there are few actual people working in the facility. This resulted in a faster turnaround in the production of cars at the facility. So we already know machines can make things faster than us, but what would happen if the creative industry became more mechanical? One view from presenter and journalist Richard Hammond, supported by papers by Hai-Kyung Lee and Peter Murphy, sum it up very nicely. Robots will never truly replace artists. Instead, technology will open the door for many new, interesting possibilities for artists to express themselves, both digitally and physically, and inspire them to increase their productive potential. Two examples I have found are with 3D printing of clothes and digital sculpting. From an article by Elizabeth Bassett, where she finds the fashion designer Danit Pelej, who sees technology as, and I quote, a means to democratize fashion, and with the technology ever advancing, it will become cheaper and faster for everyone to gain access and print their own clothes, end quote. This could have a knock-on effect to high-end clothing brands as people begin to print their own created clothing, rather as it becomes cheaper than buying them from outlets. Hammond goes on to describe art itself as a byproduct of provocation, something he feels cannot be coded, something that inspires the artist and then from a provoked state, and inspires them to create a new piece of work. Let's have a look at the other side of the argument. Another side of the argument is with Brad Merrill in his 2014 article, It's Happening, Robots May Be the Creative Artists of the Future. Please note, I did find several article journals that support the following claims. In this article, he discusses and elaborates on the idea of machines and programs replacing artists, and how in some areas it is already happening. One example he uses is with the conductor Emily Howell. This is of course a musical side. She has been credited as writing masterful pieces of classical music that competes with some of the best classical composers, and she is a machine. A bot programmed to analyze human composers and synthesize original pieces of classical music. In Brad's article, he states that when compared with human composers, people can rarely tell the difference. But still, this is not the complete takeover by machines. There is still some level of human factor, but it doesn't push further than pressing the go button. Other arguments I will outline stem from these papers. Peter Murphy's 2015 paper titled Design Capitalism, Design Economics and Innovation in the Auto-Industrial Age is where a lot of the arguments from this side is represented. It stems from the fear that automation is and already is replacing numerous people in the white-collar and mid-tier jobs. The paper also poses the interesting argument that we are heading from a post-industrial age to an auto-industrial era. Another paper by Lindsay Burke and James Shirk, titled Automation and the Technology Increase Living Standard, says automation could take up to 75% of jobs, thus putting the majority of people out of work, but could also increase the living quality as well. One case where a lot of artists lost work was the shift from 2D to 3D animation over the last decade. It's for simple reasons too. It's faster, it's cheaper, and seems to be more popular, to the point where even Disney has dropped it and moved away from 2D to 3D, with its last 2D movie tanking in the cinemas, only grossing roughly 267 million. And when compared to new 3D titles such as Frozen, which grossed well over $1.2 billion, you can see why people are scrapping 2D animation in terms for 3D animation, considering it's cheaper, it's faster, and much more popular. Another argument for this side can be found with Hatsune Miku, a 100% artificial musician. Everything from her music to her voice are synthesized from a program, and her music constantly reaches the #1 charts in Japan. Music is one example of a creative field that could be victim to automation, but there are aspects of many of the creative fields that could be replaced or altered as the way things are. In the field of games, a number of areas are open to some degree of automation, and I think can be replaced or integrated. Things like visual scripting, I think, could easily be adapted to something similar to how Emily Howell is produced, analyzing existing works and producing an original piece from the analysis. So there is potential there to start seeing games that are scripted by machines. However, in terms of actual artwork, work inspired from something and created by an artist, this is something that is currently almost impossible for a machine to do. The creative side, the thought process, is something that a machine just can't do yet, until true cognitive AIs are produced. There is always some level of human interaction that is necessary. One example I found is with Autodesk's Generative Design, a program that helps co-design itself. Let's have a look.
What if you could come up with thousands of options for a single design without drawing, all of which meet specific goals set by the designer? And from those options, pick the one design that delivers on the most important criteria, the design you couldn't possibly have imagined. This is generative design, a technology that harnesses massive computing power, creating forms with precise amounts of material only where needed, achieving maximum performance while wasting nothing. But generative design can be about much more than simply turning out alternatives. Prototypes can be scanned and equipped with sensors that provide real-time performance data that can be looped back into the design process, so the object, in effect, co-designs itself. And depending on the material and method of manufacture chosen, the software can optimize the design for those choices. In its search for the optimal design, generative design creates complex forms that would otherwise be impossible to make using traditional manufacturing methods. Now with advancements in material science and the ability of 3D printers to print metal, companies like Airbus can create forms like this airplane partition panel that's half as light and just as strong. The result? Significant reduction in fuel costs and CO2 emissions.
But even still, with this great piece of software that can help co-design your own pieces, there is still that initial human input. The initial design, the constraints required, the input, the data that is required to be input. So there is still that level of human necessity that stops us from being completely autonomous. But I can definitely see something like this becoming more commonplace. After talking with Chris White, a lead character artist at Sumo Digital, makers of Dead Island and Little Big Planet, Chris stated that the emergence of new technologies, examples I used were photogrammetry and laser scanning, aren't replacing artists, but instead are being adopted by them and used in conjunction with the traditional artistic approaches. Chris sums this up very elegantly in our interview.
Nothing can really generate art. I mean, it is that in the cup, you know, you can scan a cup, and that's it. If you want a cup, if you want a space cup, have a space cup, you know. So it's fine if you want something in the real world. If it's not in the real world, someone's going to have to make it. Now, whether someone makes it physically in the real world, and then someone scans it, or someone has to make it in the computer. Do you know what I mean?
So to sum up, Chris was saying that the use of something similar to like photogrammetry or laser scanning, if you want something that's already been created, can be used to and adapted to be used in games. You just scan a cup, put it in the game, and there you go, you're done. But if you want something creative, as he puts it, a space cup or a sci-fi cup, someone is still going to have to create that. After my interview and some reflection on other sources, I came to a similar conclusion as Chris. Creative machinery won't be able to replace humans and the human creativity, the initial spark that forms the new idea or creation anytime soon, but will become another tool under their belt and could actually create more jobs as they are incorporated. This led me to think on how we would deal with an insurgency of machinery in the creative economy. I looked to the 2016 manifesto from Nesta on the future of the creative economy. In this, an overview of the future of the creative economy based on research and government prediction is set out. The manifesto states that roughly 85% of those in the creative sector are not applicable to be replaced by machines or automized, compared to the 40% of total creative jobs in the UK. In the manifesto, Nesta states that the UK government needs to put in place their plan of action to increase the number of jobs in the UK. Their plan includes a means to raise additional funding from local councils and businesses, which would improve the art industry and increase the creative job industry by upwards of 1 million new jobs by 2030. With around 2.6 million jobs in the creative industry, Nesta says these numbers need to go up, not down. Additionally, they lay out a 5-point plan on how to do this. Their plan is as follows. The government should end the bias against multidisciplinary education in our education and turn STEM into STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art and mathematics. BIS and DCMS should establish a competitive £100 million strategic fund using regional growth fund money developed to develop creative clusters outside of London. The government should ensure that the UK's digital infrastructure allows creative businesses to develop the next generation of world-beating content, services and apps by creating a £100 million ultra-fast digital infrastructure demonstrator fund. Public funders should make their art funding go further by promoting new and innovative financial models. The government should establish a national lottery distribution for the video game industries following the model of the BFI, could potentially tip the balance of employment and unemployment in the next few years in the creative field. In conclusion, whilst I may have my own personal biases, I believe that technology will not fully replace artists. The first spark of creativity would always come from a human. Artists will integrate with new technologies and means of production to produce better work with less materials. And whilst job titles shift, the artist remains. These are my conclusions in regards to the automation of the creative industry. Whilst it may happen, artists will always be involved. Thank you for listening.